I was parked in the gravel turnout, engine off and lights out. My objective was to intercept trucks illegally dumping debris. The night was pitch black, moonless, and the only light came from the green indicators on my dashboard. Around 2 in the morning, the atmosphere changed. It wasn't visual, it was my Ford F-250's rear suspension. The vehicle, which weighs over 3 tons, suddenly tilted hard toward the passenger side, groaning on the shocks. Someone or something had climbed onto the rear bumper. I immediately thought of a bear looking for food in the truck bed, so I switched on the side service lights to scare it off. The beam lit up the surrounding brush, but the bed of the truck remained in shadow. What stopped me from jumping out shouting was the vehicle's reaction. The thing wasn't rummaging. It stepped down from the bumper with a dull, heavy motion and moved forward, staying tight against the body of the truck. Through the metal of the door, I could hear deep, guttural breathing. It wasn't the fast panting of an excited predator, but the slow rhythm of enormous lungs filling an immense chest. The vehicle shook again. This time, the pressure was applied to the front hood. Something leaned there. Through the dirty windshield, I saw a silhouette blot out the stars. It was a mass of broad shoulders and a conical head. What it did next showed a curiosity no bear possesses. It placed a hand, or a wide flat claw, on the warm hood directly above the engine. It stayed there, absorbing the residual heat from the radiator. It was less than a meter from me, separated only by glass and metal. I could see the texture of its fur in the faint starlight, thick, matted, and studded with what looked like pine needles. It didn't try to get in. It didn't strike the glass. It simply studied the vehicle with a sovereign calm. It knew I was inside. I could feel it turn its head toward my seat, even though I couldn't make out its eyes. The sensation of being examined like a specimen in a jar was so intense that my hand froze on the ignition key. After an eternal minute, it pushed itself back, releasing the suspension with a metallic squeal, and crossed the road into the trees. It didn't run. It walked upright with long, silent strides. At dawn, I checked the hood. In the layer of dust on the paint, there was a wide, greasy smear. There were no definable fingerprints, just the trace of a broad, calloused palm that had wiped the dirt away. I've reported that the area has bear activity habituated to humans to justify keeping anyone from camping there. But the truth is, that night, on that empty road, I was the tolerated intruder. The incident occurred on Tuesday during the torrential rain we had. I was at the upper overlook, checking whether the suspension bridge had held through the storm. Visibility was terrible. Everything was gray and there was nothing but the roar of water hammering against stone. Down below, on the opposite bank, I saw something move. At first, I thought it was a loose log being dragged by the current. The river was raging with enough force to shred a kayak. But the log wedged itself against an outcropping rock and stood up. It wasn't a bear. I've seen bears swept away by much weaker currents. This thing had the build of a weightlifter, but on a scale that doesn't fit the local wildlife. It waded with the water up to its waist, fighting the current. What froze me was the mechanics of its movement. It used its arms to balance above the water, long, dark, heavy arms. It took 3 strides against a flow that would have killed any Olympic-level human in seconds. It reached the rocky bank and hauled itself up in a single motion, gripping a root with a power that looked hydraulic. It didn't shake itself off like a dog. It just stood there, soaked, its fur plastered to its body, revealing dense, compact musculature. It looked toward the bridge. It looked toward my position. I didn't use the binoculars. I didn't want to see its face. I only know it was 150 meters away, and I felt like it was looking me in the eyes from across the room. There was a pause, a moment of mutual recognition when I understood that my plates, my radio, and my weapon were ridiculous toys in the face of that kind of biological adaptation. Then it simply turned and disappeared into the brush, climbing a nearly vertical slope of mud without slipping once. I went back down the next day when the rain stopped. There were no tracks, the mud was liquid soup, but the root it had grabbed, a white oak root as thick as my arm, was splintered from the pressure of its grip. That area is a natural choke point. If we reopen the trail, fishermen will be right in its crossing route. And believe me, that thing is not going to detour for us. Keep it closed. That's my final word. My name is Boyd Ellis. I've spent 7 years working in wildlife management for the state, and I've slept more nights under the open sky than in my own bed. The reason I formally requested not to patrol the Ironwood Ridge sector again has nothing to do with superstition, but with a matter of hierarchy. Up there, we are not the authority. It happened last month on an ordinary Thursday. The sky was clear and the sun was warm enough to work in a short-sleeved shirt. I was checking the trail cameras we'd set up to monitor the elk population. It's a mechanical job. Swap SD cards, replace batteries, keep moving. I reached camera number 4, located in a deep ravine thick with rhododendrons, around midday. The security housing was open, not forced or smashed, open. The lock had been twisted until the metal gave way under torque. A bear hits and bites. This required fingers and leverage. As I examined the damage, I felt that prickle at the back of my neck you get when someone enters a room without making a sound. I didn't hear footsteps. There was no crack of branches. The light simply changed. I looked up toward the opposite slope, about 40 meters away. It was sitting on a flat rock, elbows resting on its knees, like a tired man waiting for a bus. But the scale was wrong. Even seated, its bulk eclipsed the surrounding shrubs. It was covered in dirty, matted brown fur that blended perfectly with the bark of dead trees. What froze my blood wasn't its size, but its demeanor. There was no aggression. It was peeling bark from a branch with fine motor precision using its nails. Every so often it lifted its head and looked at me, chewing something with indifference. It was the look of a farmer watching a cow that's wandered out of the pen, a mix of boredom and absolute control. I stood there, paralyzed, the broken camera in my hand. We shared that space for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. It knew I wasn't a threat. I knew I was at its mercy. Finally, it dropped the branch, stood up in a fluid, silent motion that belied its mass. It must have been over 2 meters tall, and simply turned away. When I got back to town, I said nothing about monsters. I reported poaching activity in the area and recommended removing the monitoring equipment due to theft risk. It's the only way to keep people away without being taken for a madman. But I left one thing out of the report. When I checked the memory card from the damaged camera, the final image wasn't of an animal. It was a blurry close-up of a dark eye, its pupil dilated, staring directly into the lens seconds before the camera was shut off. They know what those cameras are, and they know we're using them. It was 09:15 when I left the Jeep at the fire break. The sun was high and beating down on the pine canopy, lighting the understory in a way that usually erases any sense of danger. My task was simple: check the wildlife counters at mile 3. However, after 20 minutes of walking, I noticed the auditory anomaly. The forest, which at that hour should have been buzzing with insects and woodpeckers, fell into absolute muteness. At 10:40, the wind shifted. It carried with it a dense odor, a mix of fermented earth and something similar to sour sweat, but far more potent. It was not the stench of decay, but of something biological and active. I stopped beside a fallen oak to drink water and scan the terrain. That was when I saw it, or rather I saw what hadn't been there a second before. About 80 meters away, at the edge of the old-growth forest, a section of shadow separated itself from a Douglas fir. It was 11:20. At first glance, it looked like a charred trunk, until the trunk took a lateral step. There was no doubt in the mechanics of the movement, bipedal, heavy, and deliberate. My mind tried to rationalize it as a black bear standing upright, but the absence of a prominent snout ruled that out within seconds. The figure did not flee. It remained motionless, watching me. I decided to test its reaction. I took 2 firm steps forward, making noise on purpose. The response was immediate and chilling. From my right flank, about 50 meters from the visible creature, a rock the size of a melon flew through the air and landed with a dry thud 10 meters from my boots. I was not alone. There was a second individual concealed. The rock was not an attack, it was a perimeter warning. The tactical coordination between the two demonstrated an intelligence that exceeded basic animal instinct. There were no roars, no chest beating, only a tense, calculated silence. I began to withdraw without turning my back, my hand on the bear spray, though I knew it would be useless at that distance. During the descent, I found the only physical evidence that survived the encounter. A young tree, a 3-meter pine, had been twisted and snapped at mid-height and placed crosswise on the trail, blocking the path. The break was fresh, sap still dripping. No one in the administration will accept a report about unclassified beings with complex territorial behavior, so I lied. I wrote about loose rocks and eroded soil. It's better this way. Whatever is in High Ridge does not want to be found, and for the safety of civilians, it is imperative that we respect that wish.